In the winter of 1779, a militia unit operating in what is now western Pennsylvania was cut off from its supply line for 11 days. No resupply, no shelter pre-built, no tools beyond what the men carried on their backs. They came out of it with a functioning camp, patched clothing, cordage strong enough to rig a shelter, and enough preserved meat to keep moving. Not one man in that unit would have described what they did as survival. They would have called it Tuesday. The skills that kept those men alive did not come from military training. They came from growing up in a world where a family that could not make what it needed from what the land provided did not survive the winter. Bark stripped from a birch tree became waterproofing, cordage, and vessel material. Hide pulled from a deer became clothing, storage, and tool handles. Bone became needles, awls, and knife handles. Timber, split, shaped, and seasoned became furniture, tools, and the structural bones of a homestead that would stand for 100 years. 11 skills, every one of them practiced as a matter of daily necessity on American homesteads for 2 centuries. Every one of them now either regulated out of commercial practice, stripped from trade education within living memory, or simply lost because the generation that knew them died before anyone thought to ask. Number 6 on this list held an axe head onto its handle tighter than any commercial fastener, made entirely from a strip of rawhide and nothing else. Number 4 kept frontier families clothed through winters that would kill an unprepared person in 48 hours. And number 1 was the skill that let a family walk into the woods and come back with everything they needed to outfit a working homestead, without spending a dollar they didn't have. We're putting it back on the record. Number 11. Reading timber, selecting wood for the right task. A frontier family did not cut a tree and wonder what to do with it. They looked at a tree and already knew. White oak splits straight and holds water. The right choice for barrel staves, tool handles, and split rail fencing. Black locust is harder than almost any North American hardwood and resists rot in ground contact for decades. The right post wood. The right tree nail for timber frame joinery. Hickory is flexible under shock load, the right handle wood for axes and mauls. Basswood is soft, even-grained, and carves cleanly, the right wood for bowls, spoons, and interior finish work. Eastern red cedar repels insects and moisture, the right lining for a chest that stored woolens through summer. The knowledge of which tree did what was not academic. It was the difference between a tool handle that lasted a season and one that lasted a decade. Between a fence post that stood 20 years and one that rotted in 3. This knowledge lived in the wood lot and in the hands of the person who had split, shaped, and watched wood long enough to understand what each species was telling them. It was taught by doing. It was lost by stopping. Number 10. Wood ash and char treatment, fire-hardening timber against rot. Frontier builders knew that a fire-hardened point or a charred timber surface resisted rot and insect damage far longer than untreated wood. A stake or post end held over hot coals until the surface blackened and hardened, not burned through, but case-hardened, would resist ground rot for years longer than the same wood left raw. The technique was applied to fence posts, foundation timbers, and any wood making ground contact. The char layer itself acted as a barrier. Insects would not bore through it, and moisture could not penetrate it the way it penetrated raw wood fiber. This required no purchased preservative, no commercial treatment, and no specialized equipment beyond a fire. A frontier builder who knew which species responded best to char treatment and how long to hold the wood in the coals before the hardening set without weakening the timber underneath, had a preservation method as effective as anything sold commercially today, at zero cost, from materials already on hand. Number 9. Bark, the most versatile material on any timbered homestead. Birch bark does not rot. That single property made it one of the most useful materials available to frontier families across the northern half of the continent. Harvested in spring when the sap was running and the bark peeled cleanly from the cambium layer. Birch bark was used for roofing, vessel construction, canoe building, fire starting, and food storage. It could be folded and stitched with spruce root in watertight containers. It could be layered into shingles as a moisture barrier. It could be rolled into tight torches that burn steadily in wet conditions. Elm bark, harvested and soaked, could be shaped into troughs and vessels. Slippery elm inner bark was a documented frontier remedy for digestive ailments and wound care. Pine bark boiled and processed yielded a preservative liquid used to condition and extend the life of worked leather. Harvesting bark for roofing vessels and medicine on your own land remains legal for personal use in most states. The moment you produce and sell bark-based goods commercially, processed birch vessels, medicinal preparations, bark-sealed containers, state cottage industry laws and forestry regulations require licensing that makes small-scale production economically unviable. The frontier family that sold birch bark baskets and slippery elm preparations at a regional market was running a cottage business that current law has made nearly impossible to replicate. Number 8. Hide preparation, fleshing and scraping before the tanning begins. A hide pulled from a freshly killed animal is not leather. It's a biological material that will rot within days if not processed immediately. Frontier families knew this and moved without delay. The hide was stretched on a frame, a rectangular lashing of poles driven into the ground. While still warm, pulled tight in every direction and lashed. Fleshing began immediately. A two-handed draw knife or a sharpened bone tool worked across the inner surface, removing every trace of fat, membrane, and connective tissue. Then the outer surface, scraping the hair and epidermis with a dull-edged blade, working in long strokes from the center outward. A hide that was not scraped clean did not tan evenly. A hide that did not tan evenly rotted in patches. There was no shortcut and no recovery from skipping the step. The entire frontier leather economy, boots, harnesses, saddles, clothing, storage bags, tool handles, and drumheads, ran on this knowledge. It was practiced by men and women on every homestead with livestock, taught from the time a child was old enough to hold a scraper, and disappeared from standard practice within a single generation after commercial tanneries made hide processing a purchased service rather than a household skill. Stop and consider the common thread running through every item on this list. None of it required a purchase. None of it required a supplier, a manufacturer, or a commercial relationship of any kind. Every material came from the land. Every technique was transmissible by demonstration, one person showing another in real time exactly what to do. The entire system of knowledge that clothed, sheltered, tooled, and equipped a frontier family for 200 years required nothing beyond a piece of land, the materials it produced, and the knowledge of what to do with them. That knowledge is what we lost. Not the land, not the materials, the knowledge. And it was not lost by accident. It was replaced deliberately and efficiently by a commercial system that had every reason to ensure that a family making its own leather, splitting its own timber, and processing its own fiber was a family that was not buying those things from someone else. Number 7. Smoke tanning, using fire instead of chemistry to finish a hide. After a hide was scraped, stretched, and worked soft, frontier tanners often finished it over a smoldering fire rather than relying on chemical treatment alone. The hide was sewn into a loose bag or draped over a frame above a smudge fire, punky, rotted wood that produced heavy smoke with minimal flame for several hours to overnight. The smoke deposited aldehydes deep into the hide fiber, a natural preservative that allowed the leather to dry soft after getting wet, rather than stiffening into rawhide the way unsmoked leather did. Smoked hide also resisted insect damage and held its softness for years longer than unsmoked leather stored under the same conditions. The choice of wood mattered. Punky, rotted hardwood produced the heaviest, most effective smoke. Greenwood smoked too wet and could mildew the hide. Resinous softwoods left a residue that stiffened rather than softened the leather. A tanner who knew which wood to smoke with and for how long finished a hide that would outlast one rush through the process by years. This knowledge required no purchased chemical tanning agent and has not appeared in any standard trade curriculum in America since hide tanning left the household and became an industrial process. Number 6. Rawhide lacing and lashing, the structural binding material of the frontier homestead. Unlike tanned leather, rawhide is hide that has been scraped and dried without tanning, leaving it stiff, dense, and enormously strong. Cut into strips while still slightly damp and worked by hand, rawhide lacing was the frontier homestead's primary binding and lashing material. Used to seat an axe head onto its handle, to lace snowshoe frames, to bind a chair seat, to repair harness, and to lash a load onto a sledge or travois. As rawhide dried after being applied wet, it shrank and tightened around whatever it bound, producing a joint stronger and more permanent than most knotted cordage, because the material itself contracted into a vice grip as it cured. A frontier craftsman understood that rawhide applied wet and allowed to dry under tension created bonds that needed no glue, no metal fastener, and no commercial adhesive. An axe head seated with wet rawhide lacing left to dry and shrink overnight would not work loose the way a poorly wedged handle would. This technique, so fundamental to frontier tool making and repair that it rarely warranted separate mention in period accounts, has disappeared from common knowledge entirely as commercial fasteners replaced it. Number 5. Bone and antler, the tool materials that wasted nothing from a killed animal. Bone and antler were not byproducts on a frontier homestead, they were raw materials, processed with the same deliberateness as hide and timber. Long bones split along their length produced blanks for needles, awls, and knife handles. The callus and sections of large bones were shaped into scrapers. Antler tines, naturally dense and hard at the tip, more flexible toward the base, were shaped into pressure flaking tools for knapping, into handles for knives and chisels, and into hooks and toggles for clothing and gear. Knuckle bones became gaming pieces, shoulder blades became digging tools, ribs became smooth-faced burnishing tools for leather and pottery work. A frontier family that took a deer processed every part of it, hide, meat, fat, sinew, bone, and antler, into something useful. Nothing was discarded that had value, and frontier craft knowledge ensured that nearly everything had value. The sinew stripped from the backstrap of a deer was the strongest natural thread available, finer and tougher than plant fiber, used for bowstrings, stitching, and binding where maximum strength and minimum diameter was required. Number 4. Hide clothing, the frontier solution to winters that killed the unprepared. Commercial wool and woven fabric were expensive on the frontier and not always available. Hide clothing, brain-tanned buckskin shirts, leggings, and moccasins was the practical alternative for families and individuals operating at a distance from supply. Brain-tanned buckskin is wind-resistant, water-resistant when dry, and unlike commercial leather, remains pliable after getting wet and drying repeatedly. A buckskin shirt worn against the skin in cold conditions traps body heat more effectively than most modern synthetic base layers, and does it without any commercial input beyond the knowledge of how to make it. Moccasins constructed from a single piece of hide with a soft sole were the preferred footwear of frontier families and Native American nations alike across the eastern and central regions of the continent, not from cultural tradition alone, but from the practical reality that a moccasin conformed to the foot, could be repaired in the field with a bone awl and sinew thread, and could be made from materials available anywhere deer were found. A man who knew how to make and maintain his own footwear from hide was a man who could keep moving regardless of what the commercial supply chain was or was not providing. Number 3. Pine pitch and tar, the waterproofing and adhesive that came from every pine tree on the property. Pine pitch, the hardened resin that seeps from wounds and pine bark, melts at low heat into a viscous liquid that was used by frontier families as a waterproofing compound, an adhesive, a wood preservative, and a wound sealant. Mixed with rendered fat and wood ash, it produced a flexible compound that sealed the seams of canoes and water vessels, coated the bottoms of wooden buckets, waterproof leather, and preserved iron tools against rust. Pine tar, produced by slow-burning pine roots and hardwood in a sealed kiln, was a more processed version of the same material, used in larger quantities for treating timber, waterproofing rope, and as a livestock wound treatment documented in American agriculture records through the 19th century. Both materials required no purchased inputs. Both were produced from trees that were being cut anyway. A frontier family with pine on the property had a permanent supply of waterproofing compound, wood adhesive, and preservative that required nothing beyond fire, a vessel, and the knowledge of how to process what the tree produced. That knowledge, so ordinary it was rarely written down, has not appeared in any standard craft or agricultural curriculum since the mid-20th century. Number 2. Sinew, the strongest natural thread a frontier family could produce. The backstrap sinew of a deer, the long tendon running along either side of the spine, was the premium thread material of the American frontier. dried, split along its length into fine strands, and dampened before use. Sinew thread was finer than most commercial thread, stronger than plant fiber cordage of equivalent diameter, and naturally adhesive when wet, meaning it bonded to itself as it dried without requiring a knot at every junction. It was used for bowstring construction, for stitching hide clothing and moccasins, for binding tool heads to handles, and for any application where maximum strength and minimum material was required. A single deer's backstrap produced enough sinew for months of fine work. A family that hunted regularly maintained a continuous supply of the strongest thread available from any natural source, at no commercial cost, from material that was otherwise discarded. The knowledge of how to harvest, dry, split, and work sinew, how fine to split it for needlework versus binding, how much to dampen it before stitching, how to store it to prevent brittleness, was passed from hand to hand in the same way as every other practical skill on this list. When it stopped being passed, it stopped existing. Number 1. The complete living materials system. Walking into the woods and coming back with everything. A frontier family with timber, deer, and a creek on their property had a complete material library for clothing, tools, shelter, lashing, waterproofing, and food storage, without purchasing a single input. The timber told them what it was good for before they cut it. The hide told them what it needed before they tanned it. The bark peeled in spring. The bone split clean. The pitch ran from the pine in summer heat. Every material was connected to every other. The fat rendered from a deer carcass softened the hide. The hide offcuts became rawhide lacing. The bone awl stitched the hide. The sinew bound the bone awl to its handle. This was not primitive technology, it was a system, integrated, efficient, and built on a depth of material knowledge that took generations to develop and one generation to abandon. The families who knew it did not think of themselves as survivalists. They thought of themselves as competent. The distinction matters because competence is not a response to crisis. It's a baseline. It's what a person is before something goes wrong. The timber is still there. The deer are still there. The bark still peels in spring. What is gone is the knowledge of what to do with any of it, and the understanding that a family who could answer that question was a family that needed nothing from anyone they didn't choose to need. We're putting that back on the record too. 11 skills, 1 principle, the land provides, if you know how to ask it. The frontier families who built this country from timber, hide, bone, and bark were not making do. They were not improvising. They were executing a body of knowledge so complete and so precise that it had an answer for every material problem a family could face. Clothing, tools, waterproofing, lashing, shelter, from resources available within walking distance of the homestead. That knowledge did not disappear because something better replaced it. Better is a complicated word when the replacement requires a supply chain, a commercial relationship, and a credit account at a store 3 days' ride away. What replaced frontier craft knowledge was convenient. It was cheaper per unit. It required no skill to acquire. And it made every family that adopted it permanently dependent on the system that produced it. What's missing is the knowledge, and the recognition that losing it was not progress, it was trade. And most of the families who made it had no idea what they were giving up. What material on this list surprised you most? Or is there something your family used to make that nobody makes anymore? Drop a comment and let us know. Like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.